Welcome back to week 6 of Mark's Headroom. Not going to sugarcoat this. I was having a great day, and then I ran into some changes of states, and I'm just coming off that right now. And I find that, I don't know, I'm talking right now as an actor preparing to do a scene that may be a contrived scene, maybe in a movie or a TV series or something like that, where you've prepared a character and you pretty much know the circumstance that you're going to try to live in front of the camera with other parties that are also counting on you being, abiding by the outline or the script or the framework that was laid out. You've got other actors that you're working with, and you have a set of lines, you say them, and they're kind of expecting, to be able to respond to those lines. And, if they're working from the same place that you are, you're hoping, or they're hoping that, they'll be free to respond naturally in the moment, kind of according to the loose framework that was formed. And all this, the beginning, at least with the Meisner and some other acting techniques, is to try to get to a real place of honesty with yourself and the character that you've prepared. Excuse me. Kind of dry. This is, as you know, the final leg of a 5-day fast that I'm working from here. So to prepare to live a contrived scene, it's been, has the exact words that you're supposed to say, and maybe depending on who the director is or the producers and the way that you are trained to work as an artist in such a in the moment, you may or may not feel like you have access to that full freedom. So, but anyway, my technique is to try to find it and remember myself something that seems like the right point to either drop off or begin a scene and give me access to truth in the framework that I'm hoping to contrive. And, it's a real head game to try to live in the moment and be free and act like things are surprisingly unfolding before you. And I think it requires you to really pay attention to a lot of detail. And those details can alleviate some of the feeling of conformity or oppression of the script or the scene that you're trying to live freely and artistically, to allow some aspect of some uncontrolled aspect of yourself to come forward. And at least that's the way that I work. Anyway, that doesn't really happen all that often. I think for most actors, it's they're repeating circumstances and character portrayals, even though they may be wearing a hat in a Western and shave their head for some kind of modern portrayal. They may change clothes a little bit, but you often see the same portrayal, especially from celebrities that have kind of made a name for themselves, and there's an expectation of them, and that's been, greeted and rewarded over and over again. And, so Clint Eastwood shows up as Clint Eastwood with, some variations. So I'm not meant to be opining on film work, but my point here is, I prepare a little bit for this session. It's an experiment, and I like how the experiment's going. And I was just being honest with you about where I was beginning here. And I think, we all deal with, some surprises, some good, some that pull us into a state of challenge or negativity, and have to find a way to turn those around. And I'm really glad to be sitting here with you here this afternoon before I break this fast in an hour or so. And so I wanted to share something here because someone, and I read the comment just today, before a couple of hours ago, that someone wanted to talk about, you know, working on the deconditioning and then entering into this place of the abyss and then trying to find a way forward out of that. And they were asking or wanting to discuss, what that is like. And I can tell you, I've had some powerful shifts in the last few weeks that have led me to feel like I'm just beginning to enter um, into a place where I feel like I'm operating from maybe why I've really been put here. And it's been a long time coming, and it's been a lot of lessons, a lot of introspection, a lot of hard work, a lot of confusion, and um, but here I am, and I do have a sense of order to myself today that I can't always say that I had. And it's been, I'm now in a place where I feel like I have a lot more clarity about my emotional life, about how things operate in the world. And I wouldn't say that makes the path any, easier or simpler, but it does provides some satisfaction that I haven't felt in the past about where I am in the moment, and I feel more collected about where I'm going tomorrow. I did a piece recently on and put it up on my Substack and on the Transcendent YouTube site that should be posting before too long about EMDR. And there was a point about 10 years ago when I was really struggling and falling apart. And EMDR played a big role in helping, kind of provided the physical turning point for me to begin to work from and go forward from. It released at least the model that I have of the dynamic around trauma and some of the things that I was felt like were holding me back in life from being where I feel like I am today and where I might go tomorrow. Um, and that EMDR was helpful in dissolving some of those locks and holds, in my physical brain. And it's a natural technique where you have eye movement from left to right. And it sounds so simple that some people might, kind of, dismiss it. But believe me, it's a powerful technique, but you have to do it right. Or to do it right, you really have to be able to feel in and relive with some reality those moments that you were perhaps traumatized by and that may be haunting you over and over and over again in your life. So, and that takes some courage or stupidity, depending on how you look at it, because a lot of people look at anyone that pursues anything that requires pain and maybe a little bit of what would be um, viewed today by today's standards as sacrifice. I could be going out and having fun, or I could be spending some time at home alone journaling and maybe feeling into some of the pain from some past encounters that I had. Some people might consider that to be a waste of time, and I don't. But anyway, that's, you know, I don't feel like there's a right or wrong about it, but I feel like for those of you that do want to find your path and wholeness and authenticity and develop access to your essence, your uniqueness, then some of that's maybe required. I walked into my gym where I work out all the time, and there's a guy there that's an assistant manager that's there. He's a former MMA fighter who was injured to the degree that he couldn't fight anymore, and so he has a really soft, charming, positive personality. And until you look closely at him and you see his cauliflower ear and um, get him talking about where he's been, you wouldn't really identify him as a fighter. But I find a lot of mixed martial arts people generally have a different view of violence and competition than maybe most American businessmen or a lot of American athletes. So anyway, I've been watching him for maybe 2 years, and I think he's been, trying to place his energy, much like, I have in my life, his rage, his violence, his manhood, and make sense of it. And, I watch him walk to work and, show up and be responsible and the kind of relationships that he has with the other people at it's a rather large gym here in Austin. And, he's really quite the, um, I'm really impressed with what he does for this little community that kind of revolves in and out of this gym. And so I complimented him on that the other day. I said, I don't know what kind of fighter you were, whether you won these fights by knocking people out or submitting them, or whether you weren't even very good at it. And he just kind of chuckled. And I said, but I do like, how you carry yourself here. And he started telling me about his workout regimen and how he was always challenging himself to, stay in shape and maintain this routine that he developed whenever he was fighting, because I think it is access to his vitality and kind of his essence is somehow an identity probably is rooted in much of that. And the thing that I pointed out to him is I don't see a lot of athletes or fighters or soldiers necessarily adapt as well as he has, and I really admired it. And his first response was, well, it's not always so easy. And he started to go a little bit into a negative place, and he caught himself, and he didn't make himself out to be the martyr who was suffering, and I should connect with around his those negative places. And I admired how he felt it, but he didn't engage in that with me, and he didn't offer it up. And my partner who was with me, she heard the story, and I think it was very moving, for her. But she also noticed how, he kept this positive, outlook and refused to dip down into the sadness that he may have felt and the disappointment over not being able to do what he loved or what he used to love anymore. So that is the space where you touch the abyss, where you touch those moments, just like I was describing before I came on camera here with the few of you that may be listening or watching. That's the place that you go. And that's the self-remembering that you hear Gurdjieff talking about. And I think that's the place that Jesus, spoke of, that connection that you have with your fellow man, that with mankind, that's very individual, very private. And that connection is directly with the Spirit and God. And, that's the access to the power that we have in us. And access to the love and the exceptional things. The patterns that are conditioned in us are, at least in this stage of our evolution, are not easily conveyed from one generation to the next. In fact, there's so much subconscious programming going on from the prior to the next generation that, and there's so little awareness of some of the ways that we operate as human beings that are just starting to be exposed. And I think it's going to be a matter of, it could be a few generations for all I know. I mean, in my ideal circumstance, I could see, maybe toward the end of my lifetime that there's a generation or two that are aware and living in this space that I'm trying to address right now, of maintaining contact with the reality rather than the fantasies that are created and the patterns that are repeated over and over again with these wars and, acting as if we don't have enough, because the earth does have enough for, I want to say, everyone. I mean, I read a study years ago, back in the, I think the study was done in the 70s, that the earth was designed to sustain a billion people. And of course, now we have about 8 billion. And, we're still here. And maybe the earth is suffering. I don't know. I do know that we do have a different climate in Missouri and Texas, where I've spent the bulk of my time, than we used to have. And that's just a fact as I see it. But also I have access to, I've studied geology and archaeology and, drilled wells and, deep into the earth. And you can look back and see the stories of the evolution of the earth, and climate changes and ice ages and, things that we're watching, changes on, weekly or monthly or yearly, whereas the earth keeps score and the universe keeps score on a totally different time frame. So anyway, I'm perhaps getting a little off topic there, but to go back to the humanity that I believe that we can develop, act, and maintain, sustain access to, does require some differentiation between, what's fake and what's real, or what's fantasy and what's actually happening. And so many things around those pain points that we have are distracting, or we're taught, or we're trained to find ways, by the way that we've dealt with this in the past, of there being some kind of harm associated with dealing with that, or maybe even laziness. I mean, we can put a lot of different labels on these things that evoke, reactions from us emotionally around our identity or our worthiness, and our value to the community, to our family, to mankind, your value to your partner, your spouse, your son, your daughter, your father, your mother, your aunt, your uncle, your coworker. And if you define yourself by all of those externalities, well, in my view, that's not the best place to start. That is often where we do begin to unravel in trying to be all things to all people, or to deny some truths about ourselves that have been miscast. For example, I'll just talk about my myself here. And, I made a number of mistakes in my life, and at least mistakes, or you could even say sin, because I think sin is the word was originally used or defined was missing the mark. Well, to hit the mark, well, I mean, it depends on what you value. Where's your focus? What is the mark? What's your objective? And I think each one of us have to make that up for ourselves. And of course, if you read the Bible, the mark is some kind of clean, moral code. At least that's what's been communicated to people for generation to generation. And I think there may be some reexamination of that needs to occur, because I don't think that Jesus was necessarily here to condemn um, people, or even maybe to set a moral code, but actually to give us access to the forgiveness and to use the term that it's really difficult to even say, of salvation, of saving yourself, or of allowing this process to save us. But a lot of it is about awakening to who we really are, and seeing that clearly, and then getting clear about what we really want in our lives. And I can tell you, there's times that I've recognized that I wanted to do things from an altruistic standpoint. I didn't know why. I knew that there was a chance that what I was doing would be, perceived as maybe martyrdom or something, because I didn't really know exactly why I was wanting to help someone, but I felt the emotional draw to a connection to try to help, just put a hand out for someone. And I think from a selfish standpoint, it may have been for me to learn more about who I am and about how it might feel to be in that circumstance. And not that I wasn't, I mean, as I'm describing it, there's a little bit of looseness. I could always pull back and disengage, but I didn't do that. That was rare. When I committed, I typically found myself going all in, and much often to the surprise, and sometimes to the chagrin of others, or that's kind of a weird word to use. But I think sometimes it alienated others, because they really weren't unaccustomed to working with someone who wasn't in it for the money or the sex or the attention, but just to really connect and to feel deeply and to explore the scene and the circumstance, to understand why we're here. And some people, I think when they caught me doing that, you know, pushed me away, and that was a scary place to go. And I have to honor their wherever they are in that process. And some of you may be dealing with that. Obviously, with this lengthy paragraph it's a comment on the YouTube site of Mark's Headroom. Someone's really written a very well thought out. It's expressed, at least real clearly to me, about where they're coming from and their ability to kind of feel like they're getting into this unique space in their essence, but they can't quite, they lose grasp of it. Well, that's the problem a lot of times, is when our ego tries to force or to take over the use of these powers that we do have access to, that we lose those when we try to use them in the old patterned ways that may be based on ego and maybe commercialism or dominance. And we have to learn how to live without an expectation. In fact, I'll give my I've only been married once, but my ex-wife was critical of me once, and I'll never forget it. And she said, I I was living with too many expectations. And I know she was right. So when we talk about moving from the movement from the abyss into the space where you begin to understand, I made a few notes here. And, human design is a good place to, they have some excellent technology to help examine some of these places. At least, it's based on some astrology and I Ching and I think the Kabbalah. And I think there's some real truths that should unfold from examining your design that you were born with, and then the personality that you are kind of destined to acquire and work with throughout your life. And that human design technology is fascinating. And there's like these different, I think there's like 5 different types of, basic human individuals, ranging from manifestor to generator to reflector and manifesting, or projector and manifesting generators. Um, I find that that's an interesting um, place to begin your self-exploration, or at any point in time. You can come across that and look at your, where your south node is and your north node in astrology, and you can kind of get a sense, at least it helps you frame a point of reference about some of your past and how you look at the future. And I think sometimes those things can be misconstrued as literal, beginnings and endings. And that's not what I'm condoning here or suggesting. What I'm suggesting is the framework around some of these modalities like human design or astrology, psychology with the shadow and the, like Jung's, shadow, and even the archetypes. They all provide at least a way to examine and contrast, because our self-observation, just doesn't, we're not sitting here in space totally unaffected by anything around us. And we're totally affected by a lot of our past that's kind of brought our operating system into the present means of operating and making observations and choices, and is constantly directing focus toward different things in our body and in our external world. So human design, astrology, the psychology, um, they all provide, as well as some of the martial arts and some of the Chinese medicine, I think is even helpful to help place where our energy is being um, either misused or is most appropriately aligned with what we're doing here. So, um, but I find that, this abyss place is an interesting place to find yourself in, because, whenever you're hurting, whenever I knew that I was really in a tough place and I was having, I was feeling so much pain, you want out of that pain and you want a solution as quick as possible. And you you may even tell yourself you don't want to bring other people down, in the process. We're all in this together. And we sometimes we really do have to humble ourselves and just find a sincere path that that honors that we're doing the best that we can. And other people may look at you and say, you're trying to take advantage of me, or I feel your pain. How can I help? So there's that kind of judgment that you deal with as you're trying to heal. And that creates this pressure to get better. So if you're not careful, you can find yourself so close to entering this space that you could really begin to almost remake yourself, or let yourself be remade into something that you may be really here for, rather than getting kind of passing off whatever pain and conditions that you were operating from in your past, getting most of that, kind of patched up, and then putting yourself back together to operate a little bit better than you did before. And what I see most often is that's where those things that they call relapses occur, because fundamentally they just didn't get down to the core of the issues that they're here to address. And so they repeat some of these patterns over and over again. And that may even be somewhat your story, of walking into the abyss. But I think for some of us, there really is a point where you do feel like you've experienced a death of whatever was. And it can be a scary place because you really have no idea how you're going to go forward. And that's where the breath work, that's where some patience, that's where some external circumstances and support around you, you may have to patiently endure to allow that state to speak to you. And actually, it can be very quiet, and that can be an extended period of time. And people will always ask you, well, how are you doing? Are you okay? In our society and with our language, it's very difficult to stay in that place and be okay by your human standards, because you're actually probably in a better place in that abyss than you were, operating in from a false sense of who you are, because that's where you really do lie, and that's where you really do miss the mark. And that's where I'm trying to learn how to operate and communicate with others, to enable others, or encourage, support others who I may, stumble across, that see that they're kind of in that space. So I love that this paragraph that someone left on the YouTube channel, describing almost that. It's kind of like, this is precious space. Be patient with yourself. Love yourself, not maybe in a materialistic or way that you've ever even may have considered before. Loving yourself could be, sitting in a room with a candle in the morning when you wake up, and just trying to find a new way to begin your day. I mean, it's for each person to develop their own process of dealing with their humanity. And so that's some ideas that I want to share here. I shared the story about my the guy at the gym. I thought was a great example of this, a dramatic shift in his life, a change that was, I could relate to from my own physical, um, the juncture where I think I told you the story about, injuring my knee, and it seemed to be a real turning point for me. And if I didn't tell that story here on Max Headroom, you can go hear it in the EMDR segment that I put up on Transcendent. Um, oh, let's see what else we have here. Some fasting points. I see somebody is talking about one meal a day and talking about 2 and 3 day fasts. not everybody's built for this 5-day fast stuff, or even, if I needed to, I've done, much longer fast. And for me, it got down to what was this good for my lifestyle, and how could I, this just felt like it had some spiritual support. It seemed to be taking me to a place artistically and with my own inner investigation to to be healthy and real, and not, try to hurt myself, because I think, we're really potentially, can do harm to ourselves. And that's something I really want to make sure and be clear about here. I'm not trying to condone this 5-day fast, eating for 2 days, as a lifestyle. But I'm just here to tell you, look, it's possible. I'm doing it. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not, um, I am pretty in tune with myself. And I believe that over time, I've picked up a lot of knowledge about how my body works, and how food and diet, water and nutrition, exercise, how all that kind of fits together. And I use that. But I do train intense every day. I mean, I sweat a ton. I wear sauna suits, and I'm sure I look a little bit weird, very weird, at the gym, putting myself, through some pretty intense survival tactics, um, you know, all the time, daily. And, but if you're following this channel and you're still listening today, um, part of the benefits of that are the deconditioning. For me, it's essential for my health, and it's a strong component of my exploration of my humanity. And I'm hoping that I can share that with others here on this video, and as well as in some of the other work that I'm doing on future-wise energy and transcendent, and some of the writing that I've been producing and doing myself recently, is to try to translate some of these old texts that I think need to be recast for people today, with the intent that I feel like, in the context that was around their origination. Because I think so much of the work that gets passed from generation to generation, at least on the surface, is an intellectual and a survival um, standard that loses touch with the original kernels that were the real foundation of the spirit and the essence and the care, and the those things are so essential to the survival and the evolution of mankind. That's what I hold. So some of these diets are there's a lot of people out there with different diets and instructions and research studies. A lot of this stuff is on mice, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. So anyway, reach out if I can provide some information, or point you towards some resources where you can make some decisions. Oh, there's a story that I wanted to share. As I look back at the last 5 weeks, I've shared a number of personal stories, but this is one that I feel like is very informative. And it's kind of like when I found myself in that abyss place, and doing the self-remembering that you see Maurice Nicol, young, with his, kind of abstract daydreaming, and then the Gurdjieff descriptions about self-remembering. Well, when I was in this place of and recovering from a lot of the trauma, and healing, and starting to have access to my, or finding that well, it starts a lot with the vagal system, which is a system that connects all of your organs to your brain. And the breath work, the healing that I feel like this must be fundamentally supported by your nervous system, a system that you don't have direct control over. So when I found myself in that abyss, and I knew that I was touching and affecting some of that, and it kind of coincided with some of this, like I began today talking about the states that you recognize yourself in, and then how things begin in scenes and how they move through different states through circumstances that may or may not reflect the same patterns that you've created over and over again in your life, that may reflect how some things you observed subconsciously in your first 6 years of life. So one of the things that I came up with that was very foundational for me was, of course, you've heard me talk about my father. My father encouraged me through visualization, hypnosis, and just had a spirit of that really did touch with what Jesus, I think, came to communicate, was that, we have access directly to the Spirit and to God to be more than we may have been led to believe. And to find access to that, you have to do some things differently than everyone else is doing. And one of his things for me was the visualization, that using hypnosis to kind of plant some seeds deep within your psyche or your subconscious. And then he was also big into memorization and using, various techniques to remember. And then also there was a lot of exercises that he led me into were about speed reading. And, he was telling me about, I think it was JFK, the president who was shot and killed the first month of my life. But JFK had a pictographic memory and could speed read, just accumulate massive amounts of information and data, um, almost like a machine. So I figured if that was possible for one human being, that, I could do it too. So I tried. And so I found myself, taking books and, opening every page, and, it seemed to be working. I was using it at school, and I was passing the comprehension tests. And actually some of the creative writing that was built upon some of the themes from the books that we were reading and studying, the teachers seemed to be very impressed with my grasp of the understanding of those themes and and a lot of the details from these books that I had access and recall to. This is like fifth grade, so I'm 11 years old, say. So I decided to take even a bigger risk, and we were going through a series of books, and I started realizing I had access to kind of the patterns of what was going on in these books. And so I started challenging myself not to read the books, just to hold them and kind of sit with them, and then take the test and engage myself and kind of fly without wings, so to speak. At least that's what it felt like. It was kind of scary, a scary space. But the crazy thing was that I was acing all of this stuff, and I was just going through it like, I finished a whole year's or a half a year's work. I think we were working in 6-month or maybe 4-month intervals. And I completed the entire thing in like, 2 or 3 weeks. And that that really the teachers didn't know what to do with me. And I think they talked to my parents, and of course they also tried to figure out if I was cheating, which I wasn't. And so they just found other work for me to do around the school, um, with that extra time that I had, and kind of just they didn't know what to do, and I didn't really recognize it as being all that exceptional at the time. They did a good job of kind of hiding some of their, you know, I didn't get a lot of feedback other than just I got a good grade. But I did, other kids around me, they were watching, and this angered a lot of them, especially the boys. They were so competitive with me, and I was a big, good-natured kid. And so some of them, they wanted to fight. And well, the principal had been picking up on what was happening around me and was trying to keep me from, I guess, from facing some of that stuff. And so that he would have me stay after school and do extra work in the office. And it seemed kind of like a privilege, the way that they were presenting it to me. My parents, I know that they were informed because my mother had told me particularly some details of this. And I apologize for the break there. I don't like to cut these edits, but I will cut out the transition from that I had to do with the equipment failure. Um, so I was telling you about a scene from my childhood that seems to be one of those self-remembering places where I came back in contact with some aspects of myself that I think were supported early on before I really even knew what I was doing. I was experimenting with really working with patterns and picking up patterns in ways that were unusual, and certainly weren't taught in school. And then was met with a lot of challenge by my peers in using them. And it could be kind of looked at as a sad story because, um, one day there was a kid that wanted to fight me, and so he waited for me after school and told everybody in the school, and the principal I think he was gone this day, and so they didn't keep me after school. So I found myself walking home, and I saw the crowd forming that, the boys would sometimes fight after school. They'd get in trouble for it, but, it didn't stop them. And so, and I was nonviolent, and I was also, a really good athlete, and I knew how to fight. I'd even boxed, before. And so as a kid, I think he was, the next grade up that, was wanting to, I don't know, he just decided he wanted to fight me. So as he ran up, I hit him with my lunchbox, and he, gashed open. This was even before the crowd that got there shortly thereafter, that saw him all cut up. And, I basically defended myself. And that set the stage for the next few years of my life of being someone that people didn't mess with. And although I didn't have any violent tendencies or anything like that, when I was attacked, I did defend myself. And in that case, the results of defending myself created quite a name for me as having a warrior ethos, so to speak. And it's really, I laugh at it now because it's really kind of ironic, but I did develop, and was working with so much rage. I'd been, sexually molested prior to that and had more rage than I even knew that I was dealing with. But all that suppression was um, something that I've really dealt with much of my life. But that access to that story and to frame that and to come into some understanding about that and maybe some of the natural ways that I operate in pattern recognition and um, working in ways that were unusual and unsupported. But sometimes the outcomes were very much, I got praise for some of the work that I was able to do, not just in my ability to comprehend and assess situations from books in ways that were pretty rapid and quick, but also in some of the writing that I did. It was like I had a very creative view of piecing things together. It's been called juxtaposition. And so I enjoyed doing that. And that found a place with some of the teachers that I had in junior high and high school, but some of them really frowned on it. I remember it being really um, my abilities with to write and to see into teachers, especially. It was kind of a cute thing that I did was, for some of the, if I didn't have respect for one of the teachers, a lot of times I would end up making them into a character in one of my stories, in my creative writing. And when that became noticed and uncovered, the professor or teacher that was leading that class was pretty upset. And so I remember just basically shutting down at that point and just deciding that it really wasn't worth it. So a lot of the, I bet I've created over the past 10 to 15 years, probably um, between 15 and 25 YouTube channels. And, I've created a number of different characters for some acting, film work, theater, and training that I've been involved in. And, I've written a ton of screenplays and stories. And, I may spend the rest of my life trying to organize and assemble some of that stuff into something that might be beneficial and meaningful for other people. Or maybe I just get on here and talk about those stories as a storyteller. And it's my chance to act like, I don't know, for lack of better models, Mark Twain or someone like that. But anyway, that was kind of the access to a childhood um, place, circumstance where I really early on met some of my natural access to the human form. And I think we all can recognize patterns and work beyond some of the ways that we're educated and have been told that we operate. And my fasting is a great example of it. I'm sure that you don't need, all the food. I mean, I even look at some of the food that I eat during the weekend as if I'm poisoning myself. And I don't know any better ways to survive, but I'm constantly refining what I poison myself with so that the transition from not eating to eating is easier, and then the transition from eating to not eating is easier on my system and body and life, my brain. So that's that. I put it, there's about 13 stories that I've told from my personal life in the last 5 episodes of Mark's Headroom. And if anybody's interested, I could break these down for you. But I found myself not wanting to repeat myself here. I'd like to try to challenge myself to make some original content, and it does help. Like when I get a paragraph comment about the abyss and emerging from it, and what does that feel like? I love that because that's going forward. I think I can talk about my past and about a number of observations about how society works, but I like the engagement with people that are in similar places that are looking to move forward in creative and unique ways. That's really exciting to me. Um, I mentioned human design earlier, and I think one of the interesting things to note is in the early work that Ra Uru Hu, or Alan Krakauer, is his real name, was given at birth. Um, he talks of several things that, as he got more and more commercialized, and to try to roll out kind of an education around human design to other people, lost touch with some of the strikingly shocking elements that were so profound and essential to me in the early understandings that he communicated. If you go back, you can see the Black Book and the White Book were two early works that he had. And what he would speak of, especially in these gray courses, were that we were all killer monkeys. And that's a pretty provocative statement to make, but it is something that I think is profound, because part of us, whenever you hear that, there's part, kind of a natural response that I sense in the collective and in other individuals that I've tossed that out to, is there's a feeling of denial. Oh, we're not that. We're not killer monkeys. Well, yeah, we kind of are, and so there's a mechanism that I used to deal with very haphazardly that now I have a very organized approach with, and that's to really deal with and feel that pain point, that rage, and some of the challenges that we're facing to live as ourselves, as our form was operates without the old survival patterns. We have access to that. And it does honor a view of there is part of us that is this killer monkey, that is competitive, and that has to deal with greed and survival and hunting and sex, and and has to own that aspect of our humanity. And to move forward into the abyss and out of the abyss, you have to honor that. And that aspect of the killer monkey thing is penetrated to a degree with the idea that you do have the potential for violence and for hurting other people. Owning your shadow, and that's something that killer monkey, just that little phrase, I kind of smile about, but it gives me almost immediate access to that truth about not who we define ourselves as, but the potential we have in us. And then that keeps me aligned with a routine and a lifestyle that I think supports health and kind of this safe space of not harming myself, honoring those aspects of myself that are not necessarily um, they're not Pollyannish, they're not overly moralistic. There may not be something that they speak of directly at the old church sermons, but suppression of that killer monkey and all of those aspects of our humanity, and that denial ultimately leads to disease and separation. So the flip side of that is honoring our unique operation in the world and our connection to each other and our need for community for each other to communicate and honor each other. And that's, I guess that's why I'm talking right now. Um, the other thing I came across as I was doing some work with Gurdjieff and blending it with some of the new neuroscience research and findings that are coming out, it was that our neural pathways are so suggestible and that what we focus on is planted as seeds for development for the next moment. And you kind of get more of what you fill the moments with. And whether it's forced or unforced, our brains really don't know the difference. Our bodies may. They can sense a lie. So the more authentic that you can be and organic, the better. But overall, these aspects of ourselves, we have some control over. There's a whole lot, I'm told up to 95% that we really don't. And so there's so much that's really outside of our control. So staying open and living without those expectations and trying to choose those things that feel honorable, maybe might be a good word, where you're valuing not just some Pollyannish or idealistic view of living without pain, but of looking deeper to find the things that are really meaningful and noticing that, yeah, there may be some past associations of some views or states that have been cast upon you that are not necessarily supportive, but looking for those places where you actually know that this is something that you need to really pay attention to, and a path maybe of connecting with other people for reasons you don't even really understand. They may not be transactional. They may be spiritually transactional in ways that we don't even have access to understanding at this point in time. Think about that. Um, I captured a Carl Jung quote. It says, "Do not compare, do not measure. No other way is like yours. All other ways deceive and tempt you. You must fulfill the best way that is in you." So Carl Jung said that. I'm just repeating. Um, and here's this great comment from one of the obviously active viewers and listeners, hopefully a subscriber of this channel, wanting to reach deeper into the work that I'm describing here. Um, I made a note about how we all, get up and put clothes on, and sometimes we can. And this works for us and also can work against us, but just take notice that you're not the clothes you wear. You're not the uniform that you put on. Probably the roles that you engage in life, maybe part of your personality and the way that you function and maintain. And if you have an identity that's overly associated with that, it's almost like you can if you fall prey to this, you can lose access to who you really are. Because when we walk out in the world, there's some safety in the community of people, wearing clothes and having some protection from the sex and the violence that we might otherwise encounter in, at least in American society. But in uncivilized parts of the world, that's much more, closer to what I might be describing here is the truth that underlies kind of the niceties that we have in American society. And I'm not condemning or condoning either side. I'm just taking the viewpoint of you might examine that. Wake up some morning, or if you look at people around you and just say to yourself, their bodies are not anything like the ones that I saw on TV or the movies or in those commercials. What's going on there? They're wearing some of the same clothes. Well, there's conditioning and there's some manipulation going on to steer towards some ideal, toward basically you not thinking you're enough and hijacking your values and your own ability to be so much more than the norms that are being set out there that are probably keeping a lot of people short of who they could really fully be and the full vitality and enjoyment they could get from their lives. So I made a note here that, and you may, depending on how old you are, you go back and you talk to your parents or talk to your kids, and you find people just repeating the news to you, or actually almost reading the news. They were not reading newspapers anymore, but reading maybe headlines off of some computer screen, or from the headlines they saw. Like I see headlines at the gym sometimes, and I find myself repeating and asking sometimes because I legitimately kind of Rip Van Winkle myself into um, not knowing exactly what's going on in the world in certain times of the week. And but when we connect with each other and we're basically just repeating information that we've been fed, it's amazing how much identity comes from, and actually sometimes you can spot some defensiveness about the ideas that are being repeated that have, and you have to be your own judge of this as to whether they're really understood or not. Um, as an engineer myself, or as someone that's been trained, with all this engineering stuff and been around a bunch of numbers and people using numbers and statistics and ultimately compiling all that to tell stories to raise money to basically, try to do things and then lead others. And it turns into a little bit of a game that you could say to um, manipulate. And let me just tell you, most people that have started companies like myself and raised tons of money, told stories. I mean, I spent years listening to stories and trying to spot the ones that were based in some fundamentals that would make an investment really work. I mean, when you're talking about drilling a hole in the ground to produce oil in the middle of nowhere, you're looking for a lot of data and facts to to base that on to make a good decision. So I get called on to make decisions with billions of dollars, and yeah, I mean I've got some ego involved in that, and that's something that kept me kind of engaged and helped me provide for people in my life during that phase of my life. So that discernment between fact and fiction, whether the story really works or not, the common person is kind of told that the data says this, or the statistics say that, or the science says this. And be careful with that, because most of us that have been in positions of managing large amounts of money, making investment decisions, and also sitting around with the owners of some vast aspects of the world, um, there's an understanding that you can make statistics and data basically sing a story that really correlates with your objectives and what you're you're trying to achieve. So the data doesn't necessarily have truth embedded in it the way that it's often communicated. So, and I'm just trying to open up a can of worms here potentially to examine and look deeper yourself. And we can talk about this more maybe next time. Group activities. There's so much of a behavior that changes whenever people, get together in a group. It helps, no, I don't know if it helps, but anyway, what happens is, there is a definite shift in identity and in how someone sees themselves, and the group dynamics often play out to create almost like in some cases, a cult-like atmosphere where there's almost another set of operating conditions occurring that translate from the overall collective that are together, like in this almost like a church service or an auditorium or an event, that are in concert with each other, that when they disseminate, it all changes and they operate from a different place. So there's some work that Ra Uru Hu and Human Design did about groups, and there's several of the ancient masters that will unfold some of the ideas around this. But your bioform definitely shifts whenever you're in a group setting from how you are as an individual. And that occurs even at a family or a community or a large gathering. And then whenever the activities that are engaged in, maybe someone's opining and basically being an intellectual and telling you how to interpret something and kind of speaking from a position of dominance, that creates another dynamic. And then if everyone is singing together, there's another dynamic, or being sung to, or having music played to, or being entertained, or watching violence at a football game, or competition at a basketball game, or a boxing or MMA fight. Those experiences are great observation opportunities for how your body works and how you engage with the group and how you're affected by the group. And they can give you great insights into the kind of conditioning that you're experiencing in that group, in society, and in the culture that you're working with or from, or potentially against. I noticed the other day, and this has always been a problem for me, is taking a vacation. When I go somewhere, I notice that I can view things and they seem really fresh. And so, like, I might be driving along the road for the first time in Hawaii. Let's just pick an exotic place. And I notice how vibrant the colors are, and I notice the rainbow in the sky, and the waterfall, and how green the leaves are, and how um, reflective everything looks on the beach in the morning. And I take all those snapshots, and I compare that back to my life back in wherever I'm coming from, and it doesn't matter where it was. It's just those things are all new and vibrant, and my viewpoint of that is formed in the state that I was in when those images are captured. Can be, I've noticed this happening to people on vacation, and they'll fall in love with the place. And it's almost like they view everything about the conditions that are there as kind of this heaven or ideality that when you really look at it, if you find out where they're from, some of the same conditions were back there. So why is that state so different? Well, some people that are different from me, number one, can just totally dissociate from what they left behind, and I usually carry that forward into every condition, every place, every. I mean, I believe me, I've tried to leave it behind, and I'm not good at that. It always ends up coming back, so I end up just knowing or feeling like I've created something good from the conditions, my observations, and I try to really look around and appreciate the things that are in my current, in the now, so that that rainbow, that drive that I take, that I make every day, where there's a ravine and sometimes there's some wild animals down there, or the seasons have changed and there's a slight difference. To notice those things is, to me, it's beautiful. And it makes where I am in the now so much more alive and vibrant and vivid. But we're really built to, I mean, I think most people, you know, don't operate exactly how I'm describing that I operate. And if you can't escape and go someplace and, you know, enjoy and kind of leave all of the stuff behind, you know, more power to you. But if you're listening this far into Mark's Headroom, you may be a little more aligned with the path of trying to uncover what's really going on and using that in your life. I think I just lost my camera. Well, I apologize for some of the technical issues today, but I'll work on those for next week. And so I'm going to sign off now and wish you all the best.